Good afternoon, dear students. How are you? I hope everything is okay with you. Let's stay at home. Now please attention, the theme of professional English, past continuous tense, automobile ignition system. The aim of the lesson: introduce the new dialect and practice new vocabulary, improve the use of past continuous in oral speech to increase active usage of the past continuous. By the end of the lesson, students will have been familiar with the uses of past continuous tense, been familiar with the form of past continuous tense, asked and answered questions in past continuous orally. Expected results: now, use of speech, the new vocabulary and past continuous. Be able to understand several situations in which the past continuous time creates sentences relevant to their own life that use the past continuous tense. Here you can see descriptor of this lesson consists three descriptor. Evaluation criteria. The first, open the brackets using verbs in the form of past continuous. Can correctly use a verb in a sentence. 2 points. The second, dialect at the car service station. Ability to demonstrate correct pronunciation of words, stress and intonation in accordance with the form of the English languages. 2 points. The third, how to work automobile ignition system. Can read, analyze the dialect, collect his thought, can tell about his profession. 1 point. Past continuous tense. The past continuous, also called past progressive, is a verb tense which is used to show that an ongoing past action was happening at a specific moment of interpassion, or that two ongoing actions were happening at the same time. The past continuous is formed using was, were, present participle. Questions are indicated by inverting the subject, and was, were. Negatives are made with not. How to form past continuous tense? For the singular and plural forms, single words of the past continuous tense: at o'clock yesterday, at that time, the whole evening yesterday, from to till, for yesterday, at noon. Examples: positive, he was doing automobile ignition system at noon. Negative, he was not doing automobile ignition system at noon. Question: was he doing automobile ignition system at noon? Examples: positive, you were removing ignition coil of the machine at 3 o'clock yesterday. Negative, you were not removing ignition coil of the machine at 3 o'clock yesterday. Question: were you removing ignition coil of the machine at 3 o'clock yesterday? Open the brackets using verb in the form of past continuous tense. Example: he worked in the car service station at noon. He was working in the car service station at noon. Dialect at the car service station. Under hood fuse box. Под капотом коробка предохранителя. Electronic ignition system. Электронная система зажигания. Battery. Аккумулятор. Ignition key. Ключ зажигания. Ignition coil. Кадушка зажигания. Ignition switch. Выключатель зажигания. Key cylinder. Ключевой цилиндр. Charging system light. Система зарядки. Alternate belt. Ремень генератора переменного тока. To the fuel system. Система горючего. Alternate. Генератор. Ignition key. Transponder. Транспондер ключа зажигания. Spark plug. Вилка spark. Details of the automobile ignition system. Details of the automobile ignition system. The next exercise will be working by learning a platform. Here we must find details of the automobile ignition system. Details of the automobile ignition link in this task. I offer you to watch a video how to work automobile ignition system.
Explain the essential parts and working of a battery ignition system. We know that ignition system is a complex electrical system whose function is to produce a spark and initiate the combustion process. The main parts of a typical battery ignition system are battery, ignition switch, ballast resistor, ignition coil, contact breaker, condenser, distributor, and spark plug. Now let's discuss each of these parts one by one. A rechargeable lead-acid battery is used to provide electrical energy for ignition. This battery is recharged by a dynamo, which is driven by the engine. The battery is connected to the primary winding of the ignition coil through an ignition switch. This switch is used to turn the ignition system on or off. Under prolonged operations of the engine, the temperature of the ignition coil increases, which can be dangerous. To prevent this, a ballast resistor made up of iron wire is provided in series with the primary winding. Iron has a property that its resistance increases rapidly if a certain temperature is exceeded. Thus, the ballast resistor helps to keep the current down to safe value. Ignition coil is the source of ignition energy. Its function is to step up the low voltage to the level required for inducing an electric spark in the spark plug. Ignition coil consists of a magnetic soft iron core and two insulated conducting coils known as primary and secondary windings. The primary winding consists of 200 to 300 turns with its both end connected to exterior terminals. The secondary winding consists of 21,000 turns with its one end connected to the high tension wire that goes to the distributor and the second end connected to the primary coil. Contact breaker is a mechanical device for making and breaking the primary circuit. It consists of two metal points, one fixed and the other movable. While the fixed metal point is connected to the contact breaker assembly, the movable one is connected to a spring-loaded pivot arm. The spring on this arm keeps the both metal points in contact, thereby closing the primary circuit. The pivoted arm has a heel attached in the middle, which rests on the cam, which is driven by the engine. Now, as the high point on the cam passes under the heel, the contact breaks and current flow through contact breaker stops. A condenser is connected in parallel with the contact breaker to prevent the burning of the metal points, and also helps in providing the ignition energy to secondary winding. A distributor is provided for distributing the ignition surges to individual spark plugs in the correct sequence and at correct time. It consists of a rotor in the middle and the metallic electrodes on the periphery. These metallic electrodes are directly connected to the spark plugs and are also known as ignition harness. The secondary winding of the ignition coil is connected to the rotor of this distributor, which is driven by the camshaft. As the rotor rotates, it passes the high tension current to the ignition harness, which then carries these high tension currents to the spark plugs. Spark plug is the output part of the whole ignition system. It consists of two electrodes, one attached to the high tension current carrying wires and the other is grounded. The potential difference created between these electrodes ionize the gap present between them, and thus a spark is generated which ignites the combustible mixture. Now let's try to understand the working of ignition system. When the ignition switch is turned on, the primary circuit gets closed and current starts flowing through it. This current, known as the primary current, sets up a magnetic field around the soft iron core of the ignition coil. When the breaker points opens by the action of the cam, the current which was flowing through the contact breaker starts flowing through the condenser. As the condenser charges, the primary current falls and the magnetic field collapses. This change in the magnetic field induces a current in the primary winding, which flows in the same direction as the primary current and charges the condenser to a voltage much higher than battery voltage, thus stopping the current flow from the battery. Due to this, the condenser then discharges into the battery, thus reversing the direction of both primary current and magnetic field. This rapid collapse and reversal of the magnetic field induces a very high voltage in the secondary winding of the ignition coil. This high voltage is then carried through the high tension wires to the distributor rotor, where it passes through one of the ignition harnesses into the spark plug and produces a spark. Note that another very important function of the condenser is to prevent the arc across the breaker points. If the condenser was not connected in the primary circuit, the induced extra voltage due to the collapsing magnetic field would cause an arc across the breaker points, which could be hazardous. To prevent this, the condenser is used, which absorbs all the voltage to charge itself above the battery voltage. The circuit diagram of this system is. Now let's summarize the essential parts and the working of the battery ignition system as.
Translate sentences into Russian. Homework. Learning the rule of past continuous tense and make up 10 sentences with past continuous tense. Learn new vocabulary by heart. Translate sentences into Russian. Write essay, My Profession. Reflection. I wait for your reflection on this lesson and your homework in our Platonus educational platform. The lesson is our goodbye.